On this day in history, December 31st, 1600, the British East India Company is chartered. Included in the following is an excerpt from the 1944 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, going over the history of the company. East India Company, an incorporated company for exploiting the trade with India and the Far East. In the 17th and 18th centuries, East India Companies were established by England, Holland, France, Denmark, Scotland, Spain, Austria, and Sweden. The English, the most important of these, survived until it handed over its functions to the British government in 1858. It was founded at the end of the 16th century in order to compete with the Dutch merchants, who had obtained a practical monopoly of the trade with the Spice Islands and had raised the price of pepper from 3 shillings to 8 shillings per pound. Queen Elizabeth incorporated it by royal charter dated December 31st, 1600, under the title of the Governor and Company of Merchants of London Trading into the East Indies. This charter conferred the sole right of trading with the East Indies, i.e., with all countries lying beyond the Cape of Good Hope or the Straits of Magellan, upon the company for a term of 15 years. Unauthorized interlopers were liable to forfeiture of ships and cargo. There were 125 shareholders in the original East India Company, with a capital of £72,000. The first governor was Sir Thomas Smith. The early voyages of the company from 1601 to 1612 reached as far as Japan, and are distinguished as the separate voyages because the subscribers individually bore the cost of each voyage and reaped the whole profits, which seldom fell below 100%. After 1612, the voyages were conducted on the joint stock system for the benefit of the company as a whole. In 1610-11, Captain Hippen planted the first English factories on the mainland of India, at Masulipatam and at Pettapoli in the Bay of Bengal. In 1609, James I renewed the company's charter forever, though with a proviso that it might be revoked on 3 years' notice if the trade should not prove profitable to the realm. Meanwhile, friction was rising between the English and Dutch companies. The Dutch traders considered that they had prior rights in the Far East, and their ascendancy in the Indian archipelago was indeed firmly established on the basis of territorial dominion and authority. In 1613, they made advances to the English company with a suggestion for cooperation, but the offer was declined, and the next few years were fertile in disputes between the armed traders of both nations. In 1619 was ratified a treaty of defense to prevent disputes between the English and Dutch companies. When it was proclaimed in the East, hostilities solemnly ceased for a space of an hour, while the Dutch and English fleets, dressed out in all their flags and with yards manned, saluted each other. But the treaty ended in the smoke of the stately salutation, and perpetual and fruitless contentions between the Dutch and English companies went on just as before. In 1623, these disputes culminated in the Massacre of Amboina, where the Dutch governor tortured and executed the English residents on a charge of conspiring to seize the fort. Great and lasting indignation was aroused in England, but it was not until the time of Cromwell that some pecuniary reparation was exacted for the heirs of the victims. The immediate result was that the English company tactfully admitted the Dutch claims to a monopoly of the trade in the Far East and confined their operations to India and adjoining countries. The need for good ships for the East Indian trade had led the company in 1609 to construct their dockyard at Deptford, from which, as Monson observes, dates the increase of great ships in England. Down to the middle of the 19th century, the famous East Indiamen held unquestioned preeminence among the merchant vessels of the world. Throughout the 17th century, they had to be prepared at any moment to fight not merely Malay pirates, but the armed trading vessels of their Dutch, French, and Portuguese rivals. Many such battles, usually with successful results, are recorded in the company's history. It was not until it had been in existence for more than a century that the English East India Company obtained a practical monopoly on the Indian trade. In 1635, a year after the Great Mogul had granted it the liberty of trading throughout Bengal, Charles I issued a license to Corten's rival association, known as the Asada Merchants, on the ground that the company had neglected English interests. The practical methods of their rivals disgraced the company with the Mughal officials, and a modus vivendi was only reached in 1649. In 1657, Cromwell renewed the charter of 1609, providing that the Indian trade should be in the hands of a single joint stock company. The new company thus formed bought up the factories, forts, and privileges of the old one. It was further consolidated by the fostering care of Charles II, who granted it 5 important charters. From a simple trading company, it grew under his reign into a great chartered company, to use the modern term, with the right to acquire territory, coin money, command fortresses and troops, form alliances, make war and peace, and exercise both civil and criminal jurisdiction. It is accordingly in 1689, when the 3 presidencies of Bengal, Madras, and Bombay had lately been established, that the ruling career of the East India Company begins. From this moment, the history of the transactions of the East India Company becomes the history of British India. Here we shall only trace the later changes in the constitution of the ruling body itself. The great prosperity of the company under the Restoration and the immense profits of the Indian trade attracted a number of private traders, both outside merchants and dismissed or retired servants of the company, who came to be known as interlopers. In 1683, the case of Thomas Sandys, an interloper, raised the whole question of the royal prerogative to create a monopoly of the Indian trade. The case was tried by Judge Jeffreys, who upheld the royal prerogative, but in spite of his decision, the custom of interloping continued and laid the foundation of many great fortunes. By 1691, the interlopers had formed themselves into a new society, meeting at Dowgate, and rivaling the old company. The case was carried before the House of Commons, which declared in 1694 that all the subjects of England have equal rights to trade in the East Indies unless prohibited by an Act of Parliament. This decision led up to the Act of 1698, which set up a new East India Company in consideration of a loan of £2 million to the state. The old company subscribed £315,000 and became the dominant factor in the new body, while at the same time it retained its charter for 3 years, its factories, forts, and assured position in India. The rivalry between the two companies continued both in England and in India, until they were finally amalgamated by a tripartite indenture between the companies and Queen Anne, 1702, which was ratified under the Godolphin Award, 1708. Under this award, the company was to lend the nation £3,200,000, and its exclusive privileges were to cease at 3 years' notice, after this amount had been repaid. But by this time, the need for permanence in the Indian establishment began to be felt, while Parliament would not relinquish its privilege of milking the company from time to time. In 1712, an act was passed continuing the privileges of the company even after their funds should be redeemed. In 1730, the charter was prolonged until 1766, and in 1742 the term was extended until 1783, in return for the loan of £1 million. This $1 million was required for the war with France, which extended to India and involved the English and French companies there in long-drawn hostilities, in which Dupleix and Clive became prominent. So long as the company's chief business was that of trade, it was left to manage its own affairs. The original charter of Elizabeth had placed its control in the hands of a governor and a committee of 24, the chairman and court directors of London exercising unchecked control over their servants in India. But after Clive's brilliant victory at Plassey, 1757, had made the company a ruling power in India, it was considered essential that the British government should have some control over the territories thus acquired. Lord North's Regulating Act, 1773, raised the governor of Bengal, Warren Hastings, to the rank of Governor-General, and provided that his nomination, though made by a court of directors, should in future be subject to the approval of the Crown. In conjunction with the Council of Four, he was entrusted with the power of peace and war. A Supreme Court of Judicature was established, to which the judges were appointed by the Crown. The legislative power was conferred on the Governor-General and his council. In 1784, Pitt's India Bill created a Board of Control, as a department of the English government, to exercise political, military, and financial superintendence over the British possessions in India. The bill first authorized the historical phrase Governor-General in Council. From this date, the direction of Indian policy passed definitely from the company to the Governor-General in India and the Ministry in London. In 1813, Lord Liverpool passed a bill which gave the Board of Control authority over the company's commercial transactions and abolished its monopoly of Indian trade. The monopoly of the valuable trade with China, chiefly in tea, was ended by Earl Grey's Act of 1833. It properly was then secured on the Indian possessions, and its annual dividends of 10 guineas per 100 pounds of stock were made a charge upon the Indian revenue. Henceforth, the East India Company ceased to be a trading concern and exercised only administrative functions. Such a position could not, in the nature of things, be permanent, and the Indian Mutiny was followed by the entire transference of Indian administration to the Crown on August 2nd, 1858.